Growing up in my family gives you a certain sense of history. I'm simply the latest in a line that can be traced back generations.
During so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations.
What happens when silence from the palace speaks louder than any royal decree? For centuries, the monarchy has thrived on tradition, ceremony, and control. But in one unexpected moment, everything changed, and it wasn't the king who led the way.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
It was the next generation, stepping forward not with grandeur, but with purpose. William and Kate didn't wait for permission to lead, they simply began. And the world didn't just watch, they listened, felt, and followed. This is the story of how two voices reshaped the crown without ever reaching for it. The silence before the storm. It began with silence, not just any silence, but the kind that lingers with weight. A simple message posted to the royal website read, "A formal announcement will be made at 6 p.m. No context, no further explanation. For a monarchy known for carefully choreographed events, such a sparse message felt like a shockwave. No leaks to trusted reporters, no whispers from aides, just that one line, and the world felt the tension. Journalists scrambled, newsrooms speculated, and every royal watcher knew instinctively something was very wrong. It wasn't just about what was said, but what wasn't. The absence of information became its own alarm. Questions rang out across the press, theories spiraled. Was it illness, abdication, scandal? In a world where every royal move is typically calculated, this lack of detail felt like a rupture. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily against public expectation. All eyes began to focus on the next move, and notably, on who would make it. William and Kate's sudden disappearance from an earlier scheduled appearance only intensified the storm.
The Princess of Wales pulled out of a planned appearance at the Royal Ascot on June 18th, hours before she was set to return to the annual horse race alongside Prince William.
Their absence was no longer just noticed. It was suspicious. As the hours ticked towards 6, the public wasn't waiting for gossip. They were bracing for something deeper. The mood across the nation shifted. This wasn't going to be about tradition. It was about transformation. And in that breathless silence, the stage was set. Whatever was coming next wouldn't just ripple through the monarchy. It had the power to reshape it. The faces behind the message. When the clock finally struck 6, the screen lit up, not with the familiar faces of King Charles or Queen Camilla, but with William and Kate. There was no grand backdrop, no royal crest or ceremonial props. Just a simple room, quiet and private, like a study or a modest office. The absence of formality was intentional, and it hit differently.
The royal family is slowly returning to some sense of normality, with Prince William undertaking his first public duty.
William didn't open with titles or tributes to royal lineage. He began with calm, grounded words. The monarchy is not just a symbol, it's a responsibility. That line alone signaled a shift, not rebellion, but redirection. He spoke with clarity and purpose, and it became clear. This moment wasn't about upholding tradition, it was about creating trust. Kate spoke next. Her tone wasn't soft.
William and I continue to be inspired to see young people, like you all here today.
But it wasn't confrontational either. Her voice walked a careful line, controlled, composed, and steady. This isn't about tradition, she said. It's about trust. That single phrase echoed louder than any royal anthem. It wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it. There was no visible support from the monarch or his consort. William and Kate stood alone, yet stronger than ever. In their stillness, they redefined leadership. For the first time, it wasn't about who held the crown, but who truly carried its weight. Their message wasn't ceremonial, it was authentic. And for a public long fatigued by tradition, that authenticity hit like a thunderclap. The shift wasn't announced. It was embodied. William and Kate weren't waiting for permission. They were stepping into purpose, with the world watching. The Diana Initiative.
But this evening's Legacy Award is particularly special, as it marks the 25th anniversary year of the Diana Award, a charity set up to reflect my mother's belief.
Then came the true turning point. Kate introduced what she called the Diana Initiative. It wasn't labeled a tribute, though the name alone evoked powerful emotions. It was something deeper. This wasn't nostalgia for Diana's memory. It was a mission to carry her legacy forward in action. Kate made it clear this wasn't about photos, flowers, or anniversaries. It was about purpose. The Diana Initiative was announced as a global nonprofit aimed at embodying the very values Diana championed: compassion, transparency, and direct service to those in need. It wouldn't be a passive foundation run by figureheads. It would be driven with real presence, real participation. Kate declared she would be on the ground, visiting shelters, talking with survivors, and showing up in places that needed help, not headlines. There would be no red carpets or curated media appearances. The focus would be on people, not performance. The public responded almost immediately. Social media lit up. Hashtags like #PeoplesQueen and #Diana Lives began trending within hours. The sentiment was clear. This wasn't just about looking back. It was about moving forward, with meaning. Kate's message echoed the spirit of Diana, but reshaped it for a new generation. She wasn't replacing Diana. She was continuing the unfinished work. The Diana Initiative wasn't just a royal project. It was a statement. One that said service matters more than ceremony. Kate was no longer waiting to lead. She was already leading. And with one announcement, she reminded the world that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength, and leadership isn't inherited, it's earned. The palace remains silent. While the public erupted in support, the palace responded with silence. The official social media accounts of the royal family made no mention of the Diana Initiative. No statements were issued by King Charles or Queen Camilla. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that the mood was far from celebratory. Charles was reportedly stunned. He hadn't been briefed, and the move felt unexpected. It wasn't rage, it was confusion. He had finally stepped into his long-awaited role, only to find the spotlight shifting away. The world was now looking to William and Kate, not just as heirs, but as leaders in their own right.
This morning, Prince William and Princess Kate at the center of the international stage.
But for Camilla, the reaction was deeper and more emotional. She had spent years rebuilding her public image, moving from controversy to quiet credibility. And now, with one heartfelt initiative, Diana's name was back in headlines, and not in scandal, but in grace. It brought old wounds to the surface. Kate wasn't targeting Camilla, but the public wasn't confused about where their trust was leaning. Within the palace, advisors debated what to do. Some suggested bringing the Diana Initiative under official royal oversight, folding it into the institutional machine. But others knew the damage that could cause. It would appear controlling, even jealous. In the end, they chose silence. No public support, no coordination, just let it fade. But the world had already made its choice. Kate's sincerity was winning hearts, and the palace's silence only made that contrast louder. Presence over performance. Kate wasted no time. She stepped into her role not as a figurehead, but as an active participant in the lives of those the monarchy often overlooks. She visited shelters without press coverage. She sat quietly beside survivors, listened to exhausted nurses, and comforted families carrying invisible grief. These weren't polished public appearances. They were real moments of presence, and people noticed. Stories began to trickle out, not through royal PR, but through social media posts, first-hand accounts, and word of mouth. A teenager in a shelter said, "She didn't talk like a royal. She talked like someone who understood." A young mother added, "There were no cameras, but she still came." These quiet affirmations began to shape a new image of royal engagement. one defined not by protocol, but by empathy. At the same time, William also shifted. He attended climate forums not as a guest of honor, but as a participant. No special seating, no grand entrance. In one moment, a child asked him bluntly, "Are you here to help or just be seen?" William replied, "To help, and if I fail, tell me." That clip, filmed on a volunteer's phone, went viral. But what mattered more was the honesty. They weren't trying to appear royal. They were trying to be human. And in that quiet authenticity, something rare happened. People began to believe again, not in the monarchy as an institution, but in the people within it. Service became more than symbolism. It became sincere. A quiet shift in power. The monarchy has always depended on protocol, hierarchy, and tradition, but something had started to shift, and fast. William and Kate weren't waiting to inherit the throne. They were already leading, and not from above, but from beside. Junior royals began to notice. So did palace aides. Briefings that once passed through Buckingham were now flowing through Kensington. Younger staff wanted to be part of the Diana initiative, not because of exposure, but because of purpose.
So I've always been hugely passionate about helping other people.
Even photographers began showing up outside Kensington more often than Clarence House. The attention was real, but it wasn't just about popularity. It was about impact. Kate and William weren't cutting ribbons for show. They were cutting through decades of royal distance. Their initiatives tackled real issues, mental health.
We wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has shared their experiences and taken action through Time to Change, helping to challenge the stigma which surrounds mental health.
Maternal care, climate resilience, early education. And every move they made was followed by action. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were strategy, planning, partnership, and above all, accountability. The media began to reflect this shift. Headlines no longer led with the king's duties. They began with William and Kate's work. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a realignment. The royal family was still intact, but the energy had changed. The public wasn't waiting for coronations. They were paying attention to contribution. And contribution was coming from Kensington. The balance of power didn't need to be announced. It was already visible, not in decrees, but in devotion. And William and Kate weren't just earning respect. They were earning trust, the kind the crown hadn't seen in decades. The People's Queen reimagined. The public's response to Kate was instant and overwhelming. Social media platforms trended with phrases like, "The People's Queen," a title once reserved for Diana. But this wasn't borrowed nostalgia, it was earned admiration. Kate wasn't performing for praise. She was showing up where it mattered most, not just in headlines, but in homes, clinics, shelters. Her presence was reshaping the public's understanding of what modern royalty could be. She wasn't asking for loyalty, she was inspiring it. And unlike past royal efforts that often felt curated, Kate's work had raw edges. It wasn't staged, it was real. There were no grand speeches, just quiet commitment. Meanwhile, the palace continued its silent resistance. No congratulatory remarks, no shared posts. It was as if the Diana initiative had never been announced. But silence, in this case, said more than words ever could. Within palace walls, tension grew. Kate's initiative hadn't just captured public imagination. It had challenged the institution. Camilla felt the weight of that challenge more than anyone. She had worked for years to establish a softer image, built on consistency and careful appearances. But now, Diana's memory had returned, not as a ghost, but as a mission. And it was being carried out by the very woman poised to become queen. Yet this wasn't about rivalry. Kate wasn't fighting anyone. She was simply doing what needed to be done. And the people saw that. They didn't want perfection. They wanted sincerity. And that, above all, was what Kate gave them, without hesitation. Behind the palace wall, while the outside world celebrated Kate and William's new direction, the mood inside the palace grew colder. Insiders revealed hushed conversations, quiet unease, and even moments of resentment. Charles wasn't angry, he was disoriented. For decades he had waited patiently to ascend, and now, in the early days of his reign, the spotlight was slipping away. It didn't feel like rebellion, but it also didn't feel like unity. And that hurt. William hadn't meant to overshadow his father, but intention didn't soften impact. The lack of acknowledgement from Charles, no public support, no private reassurance, cut deeper than William had expected. It wasn't the opposition that hurt, it was the absence. Camilla, on the other hand, reacted differently. She wanted control. She urged advisors to fold the Diana initiative into the royal machinery, to sanitize and repackage it under palace oversight. But that suggestion was quickly dismissed. The optics would have been disastrous, an act of jealousy rather than leadership. So instead, the palace opted for passive resistance. No support, no cooperation, just silence. The hope was simple. Let it burn bright and then fade. But it didn't. The Diana initiative wasn't a PR campaign. It was a movement, and movements don't vanish. William saw the tactic for what it was, and he stood firm. "This isn't a discussion," he reportedly told an aide. "It's a strategy." He wasn't seeking approval. He was building legacy, not one rooted in ceremony, but in substance. And that quiet defiance would mark the start of a new royal future. Changing the royal blueprint. The shift within the monarchy didn't come with proclamations. It came through presence. William and Kate weren't waiting for future titles. They were redefining leadership in the now.
According to one British journalist, the monarchy is in consummate hands after his son had a surprise encounter with Kate Middleton.
Their influence grew not through tradition, but through trust. And slowly, the media began to reflect that shift. Headlines that once defaulted to Charles and Camilla's ceremonial duties were now dominated by stories of William and Kate's grassroots work. Not because they were louder, but because they were relevant. Photographers moved from palace gates to community centers. Journalists followed their steps into flood zones, classrooms, mental health clinics. And aides began shifting too, some by choice, others by recognition. The work coming from Kensington wasn't just fresh, it was meaningful. Junior royals saw an opportunity, not for visibility, but for value. Many began asking how they could contribute to the Diana initiative. Not to be seen, but to be useful. And that spoke volumes. This wasn't rebellion, it was realignment. The monarchy had long been built on legacy and hierarchy, but William and Kate were proving that leadership isn't about waiting. It's about showing up. The Diana initiative became more than a foundation. It was a model, a living example of what modern royalty could be when guided by service instead of status. Even those skeptical of the monarchy began paying attention, not to the crown, but to the commitment. And with every hospital visit, every school meeting, every honest conversation, William and Kate weren't just rewriting protocol, they were rewriting purpose, a new kind of leadership. Kate's work wasn't limited to public moments. Behind palace doors, she led private sessions with survivors, experts, and advocates. No cameras, no media plans, just quiet, intentional effort. These sessions revealed patterns, systemic gaps in maternal health, racial disparities in care, and countless voices long ignored. Kate didn't interrupt. She listened, and she took notes. It wasn't performance, it was preparation. Meanwhile, William was also dismantling tradition, one choice at a time. At a climate resilience forum, he arrived with no entourage, no special seating, no royal fanfare. Just a name tag, a notebook, and a desire to contribute. When a child from a flood-hit community asked, "Are you here to help or just be seen?" William replied without hesitation, "To help. And if I fail, tell me." That moment was filmed casually by a volunteer. It went viral, but not because of the clip. It was the honesty. That authenticity made people believe again. Not in crowns, but in character. These weren't isolated choices. They were consistent signs. The Diana Initiative wasn't built on grandeur. It was built on humanity. The stories coming out weren't curated. They came from real people, mothers, students, staffers, who had experienced William and Kate's presence. "She looked me in the eye," one woman said. "Not like a royal, like someone who cared." The palace didn't announce these efforts. There were no newsletters, but the impact spoke louder than press releases ever could. It wasn't about appearing royal. It was about redefining royalty through service, humility, and presence that couldn't be ignored. From initiative to movement. What began as a heartfelt announcement quickly grew into something far greater. The Diana Initiative was no longer just a tribute. It had become a living, breathing movement. Its foundation was built on values that went beyond charity: accountability, visibility, and global collaboration. Kate made one thing clear from the start: this would be a transparent mission. Every donation, every partnership, every decision would be public, not as a marketing move, but as a promise. "Trust must be earned," she said, "not inherited." And that single line became a cornerstone of the initiative's approach. The UK effort soon expanded overseas. Mental health clinics in Canada joined the network.
The Canadian Institute for Health Information, and it suggests there's been a shift in how children in Canada are accessing mental health treatment.
Maternal health projects in Southeast Asia became partners. Grassroots organizations in Africa found common purpose. But this wasn't typical royal patronage. William and Kate didn't just send letters of support. They showed up, personally, humbly, and often without announcement. This presence set them apart. Their work didn't feel symbolic. It felt structural, and that structure attracted others. Younger royals curious about this new approach reached out, not to imitate, but to understand. How could they serve with purpose and authenticity? Kensington had become more than a residence. It was now a hub of meaningful royal action. And while titles remained the same, the energy had shifted. People weren't following William and Kate because of bloodlines. They followed because of impact. The monarchy was evolving, not through revolution, but through relevance. And the public didn't need a crown to see where the future of leadership was already rooted. Redefining the royal role across Britain and increasingly around the world, the meaning of royalty was being rewritten. Not by decree, not by ceremony, but by action. The Diana Initiative had redefined how royals could engage. William and Kate weren't waiting for formal roles to lead. They were already leading with compassion, presence, and responsibility. Their model of engagement wasn't theoretical. It was tangible. When they visited schools, they didn't arrive for quick photo ops. They stayed. They listened to teachers, sat with children, and took notes on what resources were missing. When they met healthcare workers, they didn't offer vague platitudes. They asked questions. What do you need? How can we help? The difference was clear. The monarchy was no longer about waving from balconies. It was about walking into broken systems and trying to mend them. Their actions shifted expectations, not just among the public, but within the institution itself. Quietly, other members of the royal family began re-evaluating their own roles. Could they do more than attend galas? Could they step into real service? William and Kate proved that the answer was yes. Their leadership wasn't flashy. It was grounded, and because of that, it felt permanent. The Diana Initiative continued to expand, but its heart remained the same: empathetic leadership rooted in service. Kate and William hadn't waited for a coronation. They hadn't needed it. Their legitimacy came from trust, and that trust came from action. The crown, once symbolic of distance, was now being reimagined, step by step, as something accessible, purposeful, and profoundly human. Silent divides and unspoken truths. Behind the scenes, tensions grew, not from anger, but from a quiet, emotional divide. William had expected challenges, even disagreements, but he hadn't anticipated the coldness from his own father. King Charles, by all accounts, was not furious. He was heartbroken. After waiting decades to wear the crown, He now watched the spotlight drift toward his son and daughter-in-law. It wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. But still, it stung. William wasn't trying to upstage the monarchy. He was trying to preserve what was still worth protecting. He wasn't tearing down the system. He was bringing it closer to the people. Yet the lack of recognition from Charles left a deep silence. No warm conversations, no simple nod of approval, just distance. Camilla's response was different. She moved to reclaim control.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
Quietly urging that the Diana Initiative be brought under palace oversight. She wasn't trying to sabotage Kate. She was trying to protect the legacy she had worked so hard to rebuild. But even her advisors warned against it. The public wouldn't tolerate that move. It would look petty, even jealous. So the palace stuck with silence. But the silence didn't work. The Diana Initiative didn't fizzle. It burned brighter. William saw through the resistance and chose his path. "This is a strategy, not a request," he said firmly. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was executing a plan. One grounded not in power, but in principle. A new way forward, crafted not from tradition, but from truth, and built to endure, not just impress. The quiet crown shift. There was no official handover, no public statement declaring new leadership, but something unmistakable was happening. Influence within the royal family was shifting, and the world could see it. News segments began leading with William and Kate. Their work wasn't filler content, it was the headline. When they visited flood zones or met with students, it sparked real conversation. Meanwhile, coverage of Charles and Camilla started to feel routine, even stale. Royal aides took notice. Energy inside the institution redirected. Briefings that once came from Buckingham now flowed through Kensington. Photographers and reporters followed William and Kate not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. Their actions moved the needle. Junior royals gravitated toward the Diana Initiative, not for glamour, but for purpose. The initiative offered them something the old model never had: impact, real work, real stories, and the public loved it. This wasn't rebellion, it was relevance. William and Kate weren't demanding attention, they were earning it. Their credibility didn't rest on titles, it rested on consistency. And that consistency began to shift expectations across the monarchy. Even skeptics began to question, if this is what leadership looks like, why are we clinging to the old ways? The shift wasn't loud, it wasn't forced, it was felt. In boardrooms, living rooms, and headlines. And while the crown stayed on the heads of Charles and Camilla, the emotional loyalty of the people was already moving toward the couple who led not with entitlement, but with empathy. The quiet crown had shifted. A new era begins. The Diana Initiative was no longer just a campaign. It had become a movement that redefined the monarchy's place in the modern world. And at its heart were William and Kate, not acting as future monarchs waiting their turn, but as leaders already fulfilling the role. They weren't waiting for authority, they were living it. Their work crossed borders and broke barriers. Mental health support networks expanded. Maternal care policies evolved. Communities felt seen, not just visited. Kate was still there after the headlines faded, sitting beside survivors, listening to nurses, hugging grieving children. William wasn't issuing statements. He was asking questions in broken classrooms and battered neighborhoods. And people remembered that. They remembered who showed up. They remembered who listened. The initiative set a new standard: full transparency, public accountability, international collaboration, and above all, sincerity. Kate made it clear, royalty should be earned every day, not inherited once. That belief transformed how the public viewed the institution. No longer a distant symbol, the monarchy was becoming something else, something human. It didn't mean abandoning history. It meant honoring it through action. And that action inspired trust, not just admiration. Around the world, people began to say it out loud. William and Kate are not the future. they are the present. Their leadership wasn't temporary popularity. It was foundational. They didn't need a coronation. They had already claimed something more powerful, the hearts of the people. And in that quiet, determined way, they didn't just redefine royalty. They made it real again. In a world where institutions often feel distant and outdated, William and Kate didn't ask for change, they became it. The Diana Initiative wasn't just a tribute to the past. It was a declaration of what the future must look like. Through presence, humility, and real action, they reminded the world what leadership should feel like. Not crowned by jewels, but by trust. Not guarded by tradition, but guided by purpose. This wasn't the end of a royal story, it was the beginning of a legacy that belongs to the people. And that legacy is only just getting started.